first of all, welcome to the Becoming of Business.
Thank
It
you.
is such a great time to explore what we're going to do with this teenager called business and this sort of egocentric, this non-sustainable, this me first teenager, and what can we do to shepherd this teenager into adulthood, and what would that look like? And we're a lot of people here who work very deeply in conscious business, but we're also people who work in business and have a sense of consciousness and even spirituality or connection with nature, whatever it is that is close to our hearts and our souls, are important. And we're trying to sort of negotiate these two camps, if you will. And one of the ideas with the Becoming of Business is to really listen to the space in between these different perspectives. And that's why I have chosen to gather people from very different walks of life. It is such an honor to have you here. And you know, part of the discussion that we're going to have and the exploration is how can we shift this idea that for those of us who are more evolved on the path of doing good and as Kurt would say, leave good on the table for evolution to actually choose, we are still in this choice of, well, we're making the money first and then we do good with the money. But you know, the maturity of business would of course be that as we are making the money, as we are making abundance, we are in the process not doing anything harmful. You know how it is when you live in different worlds, you get very aware of what misconceptions those worlds have of one another, right? And so as much as the spiritual world has a lot of misconceptions about business, the business, of course, the business world has a lot of misconceptions about the spiritual world, having now used very broad language for these different sides or camps, or of course, there's nothing to say that we can't bring these together, but evidence of the world says we haven't done it yet. So there's a lot of exploration to do where I'm asking everybody to be open to exploring the different perspectives. And let me give you an example. I was talking to Monica the other day, and I was telling her that sometimes when I do public speaking, I ask my audiences, do you guys want peace on earth? My audience is corporate audiences, mostly professionals, one way or the other. And Monica kind of jumped in and she said, yes, of course. As in, of course they want, right? Because that's really what we believe. That's really what we think. From an awareness of any kind of evolved consciousness, of course we need peace. The problem is when I ask these pretty progressive audiences for being professionals, otherwise they wouldn't ask me to speak, I hear crickets. They're like it's a trick question. Like, do you want peace? I guess. They haven't thought about it. It hasn't entered their mind that peace is a piece on the table that we actually need to talk about. And it might even be the fundament for how we can evolve into a business world that does work for everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody, which includes everyone. These ideas of separation and another word that we use a lot in the spiritual world is unity. And we're going to have a World Unity Week. Unity is so great, right? No. Business world doesn't want unity. They want things for themselves. Thank you very much. You know, I'm painting broad strokes here, but there is a lack of, let's say, joint ideas of how we're going to move into a more sustainable world, how we're going to make this teenager become an adult that's actually caring and sustainable and attractive and abundant. And with that, we have a lot of exploration to do with this. So then, without further ado, let's listen to Dr. Kurt Johnson, who is an evolutionary biologist, about, as we are exploring the becoming of business, there is an understanding of evolution and what evolution will choose given a choice. And can you shed some light on that, please, Kurt?
Hi, I'm Kurt Johnson. I'm an evolutionary biologist, interfaith scholar. That's my job here. And all of us know that, the prevailing environment in business, politics, and economics is this. It's all about competition. It's the culture of competition and win-lose and who gets on top. So what I want to explain really briefly is where that came from, and then how that has changed dramatically in about the last 5 years, but many people don't know about it. And the question of whether we can actually change now that science has changed its mind about what really drives evolution. So we were told from the time of Darwin that evolution was survival of the fittest. It was competition. It was all about who comes out on top. And so that created the Shark Tank environment that was called social Darwinism, best competitor wins. And that came through certainly the 19th century and into the 20th century to dominate the entire climate of business, economics, and politics, because we assume that's what nature does. So if we looked at nature, we thought that's kind of weird because nature's always in balance. It's very organismic. So what about this? As of 2015, the mainstream scientific establishment, based on all the new data that it could look at by current technology and could study how groups make decisions, they suddenly found out that that idea of Darwinian evolution was wrong. It wasn't that survival of the fittest was wrong. The problem was that the definition of fitness changes as you go to levels of complexity, and particularly when a conscious species comes in to the picture that needs to make conscious choices. So in what now is called the knowledge of group selection and hierarchical selection, multi-level selection, how groups make decisions, science knows as of 2015 that groups always select what is best for the whole. It selects what serves the purpose of the entire group. This is a complete sea change within evolutionary biology, and it was summarized in a book by Yale Templeton on the foundational questions of science, redefining natural selection, and also redefining sociobiology, which is the whole field of how organisms in societies work. So the truth now is that actually nature selects for cooperation. Fitness is the best cooperator in any level of complexity or a conscious being. So here's where that goes. It creates a situation that nature can't make these choices if we don't offer them up as possibilities. Now in natural process, that's called mutation. Mutation happens. If it has an advantage, nature chooses it. That's how biological process works in natural selection. But conscious selection, that requires this, and it requires the heart, and it requires human beings making choices. So it's one thing to know that evolution wants to choose the thing that's best for the whole and the best for the whole group, but it can't make those choices if in our work, we don't put out the behaviors and the models that offer those clear choices. So that's really about it. And here's the deal. Science changed its mind in 2015. Science looks at data. It can do that. It can change on a dime. It can say that wasn't true and this is true. Very, very difficult for politics, business, and economics after 150 years from Darwin to make that adjustment. And that's a huge question. Can our planet adjust to a different culture for business, economics, and politics based on how evolution really works? So.
Thank you, dear Kurt. That really sets the stage for how we can explore giving the choice, actually being part of offering the choice of good to evolution and the evolution of business, because of course what you are framing here is a massive paradigm shift. And looking at the spiritual community on the one hand, and the business and, let's say, Darwinistic trained world in the other hand, there is an assumption from a spiritual community that we want peace on earth. And we are exploring peace together today as it relates to consciousness, but as it relates to business and what people really want. What are they aware of today? And I would love to hear, Allyson, you have been in uniform for 36 years and you have parked that for good, right? Welcome, welcome. And I wanted to just hear your perspective and reflection on when you hear this massive shift in the evolutionary way that we look at survival and what's best for us, and having been in the Army for so long, can you see that there is any hope that we can have an embracing, and how in that case can the idea of cooperation, collaboration, and the good of the whole, can that be adopted by something like the armed forces? What comes up for you?
You know, that's interesting, because as Kurt was talking, you know, what I reminded of, the military, one of the things they're known for is training leaders. You know, I'm teaching you how to lead people. And much of that comes with being very aware of what skills you possess, not only what they want you to learn, but what do you possess and what do you need to build on to adapt to that? Because that is the framework from which you can influence everybody else. Because we all know what a poor leader looks like for the most part. But, you know, they're very good at that. And one of the other things they actually are very good at is the understanding the need for collaboration outside of their little fiefdoms, even though they survive in those fiefdoms, but especially when dealing internationally or globally, or in this case in the case of war, they can't go it alone. They know they can't do it alone. So there is a survival need within them to collaborate in order to compete and win, you know, because that's the desire, is to compete and win. But then how do you get past the compete and win to the conscious making of choices? And I think the military is struggling with that today, certainly as it relates to dealing with women and people of different race and diversity. The understanding of their unconscious biases, that it moves to a consciousness, then they can make better decisions, whether it's about how they prosecute a war, how they go into war together, how they collaborate, and they're not the same people in the same room making the same decisions and ending up with the same results, which, you know, learning from their past behavior, even as good as they are at that, they still repeat the same behavior. So this whole idea of making the conscious choice, you aware of what those conscious choices are, I think institutionally, the uniformed services have always kind of been ahead of society in the United States in a lot of ways. And this might be another opportunity, if they embrace it, to be a leader for business and for government in general, in terms of making those conscious choices. So I would like to believe, I'm not just optimistic, but, you know, the young people today are looking for clear choices to be made. And I think they're going to demand that, you know, their leaders do the work on themselves to be able to provide them those clear choices.
Thank you so much, Allyson, for your unique perspective. And I'm gonna slide over here to Monica. Having worked so long at the United Nations and with United Religions Initiative, there is, of course, a huge peace making effort at all times as soon as religious leaders and faith leaders, spiritual leaders come together. And when you hear the perspective of evolution, and you hear the perspective of how Allyson is talking about the competitiveness aside, there is a big leadership role in the armed forces. What are your thoughts on where we can go from here? What are some of the talks that you are involved with or hear that you find valuable to bring into this space? Because we are truly just exploring a space right now between different viewpoints.
Thank you for that question, Linda. I think I do want to correct one misconception when you talk about religious leaders coming together and nations coming together to create peace or to make work together and collaborate. The nations of the United Nations, and particularly the Security Council, in my view, are the ones that are building and selling the weapons. How that is in charge of making peace is kind of hard, because the weapon sales is a huge, huge part of particularly the permanent members of the Security Council. But looking at the ideals, I think that the UN has started from a global perspective. It might not be fair to people in big countries or heavily populated countries that a vote in the General Assembly right now represents the same in the United States as it does Morocco or San Marino. It just little countries, big countries, and the Security Council really has the most power in the rulemaking. So if that's how we're supposed to get to peace, I don't know how we do it unless we evolve. And one of the ways that we can evolve came out of the General Assembly in 2015, and they're called the Sustainable Development Goals. And it really does set a visionary set of goals that we can accomplish. And we could get to peace 30-30. The only problem is it doesn't address military spending in any way, shape, or form, constructively. I mean, peace is one of the goals. But if you are worked tremendously hard to create a safe water project and you get a bomb, it destroys the whole thing. So we really have to look at what is the big picture. We cannot live after a nuclear war. We cannot live with climate change as it keeps going up. It might be a slower loss, but we even know this. And with the scientific proof, the fact that it's trying to be refuted by people who claim to be smart is almost unbelievable to anybody who is looking at what can happen. I have a friend who does resilient cities, and one of the ones that she talks about is Miami. And the fact that Miami is the only major city in the United States that is in tropical climate to start out with, but just you go to this city and you see where it is built and you see what it's built on, and you wonder what would happen when the water comes up and what happens to all the people who are employed to help all the people around the big high rises, because as those are lost, what comes behind it is people without jobs and without anything. And we are seeing something in this pandemic that I think makes this conversation so much more important. Where do we want to go with business? I had the good fortune of listening to the chairperson of Macy's talk about how important it was to listen to your employees, because happy people make a happy place. And you need to be able to connect with people and want them to come to work. You want them to enjoy what they are doing. Some people want to just be able to feed their family, and I think some people working really hard days and hard jobs, even more during this pandemic. I mean, I don't know how many of us have thanked our garbage people and different people on the front line. Who would have thought the checkout person at the grocery store would be a frontline person. And so I would like to see us, with any size business, talk about the importance of the collaboration and the cooperation that needs to happen to make it a place that people want to come to. Because if people want to work there, you will generate more business because they will welcome people when they come in. And it just seems to make sense. I like the idea. Happy people can make a happy place, and it makes a difference. And so I just wish that people would start from a place not for the bottom line only, but what the commons is and how is it that we build it together. And like Ben and Jerry, I mean, they have their pay scale so that the top executives only make a certain percentage of what the lowest paid person does. And when we see huge disparities and huge lack of caring about the person underneath, and the person who is so often doing most of the grunt work in the middle, and that person at the top gets all the credit, where are the thank yous? Where is the appreciation? Where is the whole collaboration and teamwork? And I think as we get more diverse workforces, more women in places where you have to collaborate to work a little bit more, I just think we are on the verge of change, and we can get there. And one of the best ways to get there is by finding how to work collaboratively, looking at the common goals, and making sure that we don't pollute the planet as we're doing what we're trying to do.
Thank you so much, Monica. And you were quoting someone who is in our very circle, Germaine Moody, about these actually happy people make a happy workplace, and we can actually build a much happier world, more joyous world by focusing on that. And Germaine, you are very established in your field, in your own right. You are also the young person in this circle, so you have a perspective that will be very valuable to us, and that is very, very valuable. What do you make of what you've heard so far, and especially tying it back to what you already feel is so important with this joyous aspect? Maybe it's hard for, like, people might feel that they're very far from joy. I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but do you, as a younger player still shaping the business that we're going to be living in the next few decades, what are your reflections so far?
Well, first, I agree with everything they said and everything you've said. It honestly, at this point, in our day and age, in this era, it really is about leadership. It really is about a leader showing exactly how to live your best life, how to live on purpose, a leader being and having that same joy. You know what I mean? I honestly believe if there were more leaders who would take their stand, who would take their position, then the world itself would be a more joyful place. Joy is so incredibly important because there's every single day, there's so many things that go on around the world and in our personal life and in our business life. First of all, we're living multiple lives throughout the day. We're a business owner, we're a parent, we are a part of this organization. I mean, there's a lot that goes on in a typical person's life every day. So if like us, like all of us, for example, if everyone were to take their leadership position in life, then the world itself would be a more approachable, joyful place. So I totally agree with everyone. From a younger perspective, this generation right now, they are looking for the right leaders. And if the leaders don't show up, this generation will lead itself. You know, they will. I mean, if you just look at what's going on around the world right now, it's like you have to be authentic, first of all, because they've seen it all, they've done it all. And this generation is more connected than any other generation in the world. You know, these kids, they're growing up, they have friends in Italy, South Africa, Canada. they have friends all over the world, and they are communicating. So whatever leaders aren't doing, this generation is talking about it. They're preparing to do it, and they will do it. So we're in a whole different time frame. And the fact that the connectivity is so easy these days, the communication is even easier. So one message can go around the world instantly. Years ago, this could never happen. So if somebody is spreading joy, that joy can go all around the world in an hour. You know what I mean? So there are a lot more benefits now. There's a lot more power now. And all it takes is one person to start that flame. And it starts with us. And if, like I said, if we don't lead, this generation will lead, and hopefully they will lead with that same joy.
Thank you so much, Germaine, for bringing up not only riffing off of the joy, which is something that I think that we need to keep on talking about, because there's nothing in the world that we can create unless we start on the inside. And that's really
Right.
your beautiful point. And also thank you for taking leadership and really putting that on the table right now. And as we have leadership on the table, and we have talked about a little bit more about the individual shift, I would love to hear from conscious business rock star himself, Peter Matthies, about the possible, what you have seen structurally that stand in the way for moving in the direction. Now, Germaine has already given us the warning. If we don't do it, it's going to be done for us. And then it might happen in a kind of radical way that takes away our savings, that make us feel unsafe, and all of these things that we actually want to not feel. That's what we're protecting in the first place, you know? And so maybe if we move now, we can stand a chance to create a system with individuals who are ready for peace, ready for a larger level or higher level of consciousness. What have you seen, and what are your reflections so far?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Linda, and thank you for all your input. It's very, very powerful. There are a couple of things that come to mind. The first one is that I want to speak about that we don't need to make the change. Because I believe there's, as Germaine said, there's an evolution in place. When we look at individuals that are entering the workplace, millennials, 80% of them want to work with purpose. If you just look 60 years back, we have killed people systematically for having a purpose, like Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, we've incarcerated them, Martin Luther King, Kennedy. All these individuals had a purpose and they didn't get very far with that. Now we have a society where purpose is en vogue. So we have this evolutionary trend that we see in people that are actually newborns, that actually change and in the way they think, the way they feel connected to the world. And I believe we can trust that, so that we don't feel we have to do all the legwork. I see us much more as somebody who can support evolution and be the ushers and strengthen it and support individuals in expressing their new beliefs and bringing that into the world. So that's the first thing. The second that we see in organizations, and we work with them for the last 15 years with our models all across the world, from Australia to South America, in large corporations, in organizations of all sizes. And we do one, in terms of culture building, we do one exercise with them where we truly ask them what they would like to build if they had the choice. And I still have to meet one person who says they want to create something that's fear-based, that's destructive, that harms other people. When I hear those statements and read those statements, they're truly touching. And it doesn't matter whether it's a high executive in South America or whether it's a factory worker in Germany. They all come up with the same thing, the same desires that drive all of us. Sense of connection, sense of openness, contribution, growth, connection to each other, freedom, those kind of things. We as human beings are ultimately driven by the same thing. So the question becomes, why are we not living it if we are all putting it on paper? What is the stumbling stone that makes us bump against our head against the wall every day in every aspect of our life? What we have found, it's what we call our model, the model of dominance and subservience, which is really a human behavior that is ingrained in us since 8,000 years, basically, since the agricultural revolution. This is a model of thinking that's based on scarcity, that there's not enough. I am not enough, there's not enough money, there's not enough love, etc., etc. If our thinking is dominated by this model, we are operating from fear instead of love. And all of our actions have a destructive component, either for ourselves or for the people around us. You can see that in politics these days, you can see it everywhere. You can see it even in private relationships, where it breaks down with jealousy, etc. So in my experience, when we expose companies from all across the world to this model, some don't get it because they just simply don't get it. It's like the Darwin model that simply doesn't work anymore for them. Others just go, holy cow, it's really pervasive in our culture. If we can become conscious around this model, that's, in my eyes, the first step for us to rethink, make different decisions, maybe not make a decision at all when we're actually triggered and coming from fear, and actually create the places that we want. So maybe as a bottom line is I see us here on this planet as attending a classroom for overcoming fear, basically, for growing in our individuality, in our personality, and to overcome this model, to move from fear to love in every aspect of what we're doing, which is a hugely challenging enterprise, because every day we're confronted with fear. Every day we're confronted with lack around us. And to stay in that space where we say, there's still abundance, there is still something that I can come from love and can contribute in a positive way. That's a task which nobody has been educated us in our culture. So I believe once we become aware of that, we can change this model. It takes exercise, it takes practice, it takes discipline, and maybe it creates a place where we can support each other. So the idea that I'm putting out to organizations is, if we are all in the same boat here of overcoming fear and really wanting to create places where people can thrive, where we can do something truly beautiful together, what if we can support each other in that? What if we can allow people to be in fear and then say, okay, we're there, how can we move out of it? Be gentle and compassionate with ourselves and support each other on this common journey that we are on, so that we can create the places that we create in business, in politics, but also for us in our personal lives.
Thank you so much, Peter. Such valuable wisdom to bring into this space. And it got me thinking of a suggestion that came out in the last year, and you're going to know what I'm talking about, which is to develop a Department of Peace instead of having just the Department of Defense. Is that what it's called? Sorry. You know, the Army guys.
Yeah, it used to be called the Department of War.
No way.
It was.
Yeah. Yes, way.
Changed after what, the Civil War, I think?
It did. And, you know, something that Peter said struck in me, that, you know, you look back to historically how wars were started was based on fear and scarcity. So if you can change the human condition that, you know, causes this to happen, it has reverberating effects.
And really what could be suggested between Peter and Allyson is that with the leadership skills and the implementation skills that the Army has, and really great at winning, there is the suggestion that the Army or the Department of Defense could actually be the Department of the love and the cooperation and the collaboration and the prosperity and the abundance that we're actually talking about. You know, in quantum physics, they often talk about how you can't make atoms break apart unless you introduce an energy that's stronger. That's what's holding these particular atoms together. And so by introducing something completely different that has to do with the goals of peace, the goals of love, can you see, not as a feasibility thing here, what's plausible, but can you see, Allyson, that the skill sets of the Department of Defense could be used and utilized in changing the definition of winning?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I think they have an opportunity because a lot of people, when you go into an area, the first concern they have is for their safety, typically. And if you can connect to them on a human level, you know, you see people being able to go into the communities and connect to them on a human level, it makes a difference. So if we have done the work on ourselves so that when we go into that community, we are truly connecting, as we talked about, and being conscious about the decisions and the choices and the way we communicate and the ability to build that bridge. Absolutely, they can be a vehicle, because you're talking about an organization that is in so many communities and throughout the world, and, you know, regardless of whose it is. And it's, you know, they have a role that they can play to help build this bridge.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you know, I was a part of writing 2 books on peace studies. And one of the things that I hadn't even thought of until we did this was that peace isn't really something that you have to defend and make happen. It's actually a result of goodwill. When there's goodwill among peoples, there's no necessity at all for what becomes a disruption of peace. So that's so important to understand. And when we were with the Dalai Lama in November, and I was there with the fellow who's the champion of this whole cooperative model of evolution. And what the Dalai Lama said is so true. In other words, why are we still in this situation where we still call it defense and we have to work for it? He said the problem is that where the deepest inner values are in humanity are not where the tractions of power are. And where the fulcrums and tractions of power are not where the deepest values are. And that has got to be solved, because if you look at the people, particularly the dictators of this world, and we have so many closed societies in the world, those are folk who are basically not connected to the deep inner values, where the way they operate wouldn't even be thinkable by those of us in any type of consciousness from the wisdom traditions or the perennial philosophies or whatever.
Yeah, maybe just one comment that pops to mind. My wife always says, if you want to know what people are driven by or why things are happening, follow the money and you'll get to the information. So we are driven by that. And I don't think we can make money with peace, or maybe not as we wish to, because Madison Avenue is operating based on scarcity. It's based on fear. It's based on I'm not good enough. It's based on I need this handbag. And if people are running around being completely peaceful with themselves, who would vote a president that's not healthy for us, or I don't know, a company leader that's not healthy for us, if we are centered with ourselves? So peace is not something that many people want, because people in peace oftentimes cannot be manipulated. So in the end, it comes down to the individual, which Allyson and you all have basically mentioned, is leadership starts with ourselves. We are a leader either by default or by choice. It doesn't matter whether we're at the top of the pyramid or at the bottom of the pyramid. So the question for me has been for a long time is what homework do I need to do to come into that inner peace for myself? How can we raise consciousness systematically in individuals all around the world, so that we can consider stopping for a moment when we jump into this knee-jerk reaction that might hurt other people? And that to me is a continuous question. How can we create a system that can spread around the globe, where people can systematically raise in consciousness? What's needed to do that?
Yes, Monica, what's needed to do that?
Well, I think we have to shift to human security. And human security isn't just, it can't be done with just bombs. We are seeing that right now. When we think of defense and we think of it as a military or a gun-controlled or it won't make a difference with the pandemic. It isn't making a difference. We need to live in a healthier style. And just having the right look and the Madison Avenue look, as people are caring about their clean water and the fact that we need to look ahead, we need to really take in the fact that how much water it takes to make a simple shirt, how much pollution is being put into water that can never be taken out of the fracking industry, and mountaintops that are being lost with mining. And so we do have to look at where we are, where we want to go, and find the ways that we can balance our way up without losing the planet for the future generations. It is a must that we think long-term and think in terms of the way the indigenous have taught. Let's think ahead 7 generations. And let us particularly think about the things like clean air, clean water, food on the table, education for our children. And if we put our children first, a lot of things would shift. And I think that looking at children as a treasure, as a resource, is one of the first places that we can begin to move ahead as a society and look at schools differently, which is happening. So I go for the children. I go for looking at the younger ones and getting the ideas and moving out of the way so that they can bring them in when we couldn't. But we've started it, and I look forward to seeing what's coming.
Yeah, just as a quick thought on that, again, when David Sloan Wilson was talking to the Dalai Lama, he said, if we don't learn to live by evolutionary principles, we'll simply go extinct. And the Dalai Lama then burst out. He said, well, greed is good is not an evolutionary principle. Destroying your environment is not an evolutionary principle. The evolutionary principles that are there are reciprocity. And you said they come from the deepest wisdom of indigenous peoples that lived with the land. And mutualism, kindness, compassion are just natural ways that are also, evolutionary principles. So, as you were all saying, if we don't get it right up here with our story about reality, our behaviors can really be off.
Germaine, do you have thoughts on, I just look at your generation and younger as just the most, the coolest generations ever. It's like you have this, speaking of evolution taking care of itself, there is just the priorities that you have and the need to actually know where things come from before you buy them. And I'm not, this is a very, very broad brush here, but comparatively, I have to say that the way that your generation and younger have stepped up and demanded to know, speaking of what Kurt was just talking about, like we actually have to get it straight up here and here, of course, in the heart also, that's where we connect. Can you speak to some of the viewpoints from the younger generations and how you see that the shift is happening, and just bring the wisdom of that into this space? Because I have a feeling that it might be hopeful, and there might also be questions of where to go with your generation from here.
Well, like I said before, it comes down to technology and connectivity. This generation did not come up separated, first of all. We came into this thing connected to everyone. And I think that's the biggest difference than 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago, maybe even 25. We literally came into this generation with mobile phones, social media. You're automatically connected to every race, every culture, every country, just like that. So a lot of the generation, they don't see color. They don't see all the other things that have just really segregated the world. They came up in connectivity, and it's hard to tell them You're not supposed to be talking to this person. You're not supposed to wear this or be like this. They came up together. We came up as friends. Just like now, we're all over the world on Zoom. This is what they know. They don't know anything else unless it's taught to them. So the main difference is that our generation came up connected, and we like it, and we like each other, and we love the differences, and everybody's becoming like each other. So it's really hard to disconnect. It's really hard to, it's hard to not have peace when you were born into all this love and all these different cultures. It's really hard to not have it.
It's so hopeful and beautiful that you say that. And I think this connectivity, of course, is not just in a technical matter, as you're speaking. It really is about loving each other and respecting each other on a different level than we ever got the chance, sort of, to even.
Yeah, it's like instant. I mean, you get on LinkedIn, you get on Facebook, and if you like or you comment on something, next thing you know, you're in this whole community of people, and next thing you know, you're friends, and next thing you know, you're starting businesses together. It's the most amazing time to be alive. It's just amazing right now. We cannot deny the power and the time we live in. We can do absolutely anything at this point. We are unlimited. And just like this Zoom call, we are unlimited right now. If we want peace, we can have peace. We don't want peace, we can not have peace. But it's in the power of the people right now. Government is not going to change the world. It's the people who change the world. It's always been the people. So everything is up to us.
Yes, and I think the people component is something that we're going to find more and more as we're exploring different areas in the becoming of business, that business really is a collection of people and a collection of intentions and hearts. And I wanted to check in with you, Kurt, when you hear Germaine speaking of this connectedness and to some degree interconnectedness that he's describing in the younger generations. How does that relate to the evolutionary findings that have been so radically different actually in the 5 years, and as you are looking at what is the becoming of all of this?
Well, you know, evolution and ecology are synonymous because evolution happens in ecosystems. It's all about interconnection. And actually the pro-social movement in science, which is all about the values we're talking about, they say spirituality is interconnection. They say it's not like some woo-woo thing, it's about interconnection. So I think this understanding that we need to live by evolutionary principles, and that's not new. Indigenous peoples had that sense of connection with the environment and what that meant for millennia. But the opportunity we have now, that's why I really want to throw it back to everyone else, is across all of these arenas to really understand what these principles are. And leadership is certainly one, you know, leading in the way that would do what's best for the whole. Everyone's going to say yes to that. And so I think just the whole of everything we've said here today, you know, it plays into this chance to make this confluence, this convergence toward the world that we want to see, which is actually what evolution is doing in the first place.
I want to say I totally agree with everything. As far as business is concerned, business and people in general, business want to connect with the customer. They want to connect with people, and people want to connect with each other. And in any time when we're in an era where we can connect better, then that evolution is just gonna explode on all levels. So people want to be loved. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be successful, and everybody wants to be recognized. So as long as we continue to do that through our lives, it's going to spread, and the world and business will continue to grow and continue to evolve.
Linda, I have a question for Peter. The companies that you deal with that don't get it, and you hear what Germaine talks about, the young people coming into the workforce that want to feel a part of purpose, what do you tell them, or what's your communication with them?
We take them through certain programs. And those programs are not just a weekend, because we're thinking about changing mindsets and perceptions, which oftentimes doesn't happen on a weekend, but requires a little bit more massaging to also implement it then in the organization. So we have specific programs that guide people through that change. And one of the biggest mindsets that we're talking about actually is the concept of oneness and interconnectedness. That would change everything for all of us. And we actually start off with that and say that our model of success is fundamentally broken, and that it's not designed to make us happy. And so we challenge them and then go into really your authenticity, who you are here to be during this lifetime, not just from your own perspective, your gifts and talents, but from a little bit of a higher perspective. When we take people there, we really take them to places that they've always wanted to go, but never were able to reach. To those islands out there where they say, this is what I've been yearning to touch upon. And as people sink into that authenticity, there's just a sense of connection and purpose and togetherness that emerges that changes everything. And then we say, okay, now how does this ripple out into the organization? How do you now interact with your team differently? How do you address conflicts differently? How do you build a culture differently? Those kind of things. I believe one thing that just came to mind here is, since there are wonderful females on board here, is the balancing of masculine and feminine energies that is super important if we want to make this shift. Yeah, I don't speak about male and female, but more about masculine and feminine energies, because we hold them as men as well, and to just usher in a balance. Because if we want to have peace on earth, there's the caring, the nurturing for each other is going to be critical. So.
Thank you.
And that's
I'd just like to share one little thought, and it came up in somebody talking about COVID-19, and it was that many of us on this call, it looks like, are experiencing uncomfortably blessed, because we are seeing that there is such hurt, such need, such injustice on one hand, and yet we've been pretty darn fortunate. And so building the bridges in where we are, how we give, what we invest in, and what we want to promote is absolutely essential at this time. And it's not that I think that it has to be perfectly balanced, and particularly that peace is some sort of a totally wonderful la thing. I mean, I think of an EKG as looking at life, and that's what peace is like too. It's up and down, and different choices. And I just want to say what a joy it is to be with each of you. I'd love to know you better. And thank you so much, Linda.
Same here. Thank you, all of you.
There's a lot of evidence that points to peace as actually being a very high denominator for prosperity. And so the more we can shift the idea that we get prosperous, but by taking what someone else has or what nature has, but that there is an actual prosperity link to peace. I think that shift is going to be really, really important.
The movie I thought of as we were talking about this was the movie Tucker, that had seatbelts in the car. It had all these forward-looking things, and yet the structure that was killed the business. And I think we are at a point where the young people will not let this happen again. It's not going back. And I think we need to take this wave and move it. So thank you
I agree.
for what you're doing to move it.